Now, to our first speaker. He's trained as a chef. He worked as a restaurant critic along with his wife Sadie. He became a farmer at Fat Pig Farm in the Huon Valley. You probably know him as presenter of The Gourmet Farmer on SBS. He's also hosted 2 documentary series, What's the Catch, about fishing and seafood, and For the Love of Meat, obviously about meat and carnivory. He's the author of 11 books, the latest of which is called On Eating Meat. I've been losing sleep because I've been reading it for the last week. Not because it keeps me awake, it's because I just can't put it down at night, and then I spend the rest of the next day or that night dreaming about it and thinking about it the next day, and then spending a lot more time in supermarkets standing there in indecision thinking, what the hell am I going to eat? So thank you very much for that, Matthew. Ladies and gentlemen, this all brings us here tonight where Matthew Evans is going to talk about vegans, carnivores, and the murky ethics of our food choices. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Evans.
Thank you, Mark. When you said there was going to be amazing speakers, I didn't think I was really disappointed to be leading the pack because I won't be amazing, but I know that, from the look of some of the others, they're going to be incredible. So I know it's Science Week, we're supposed to be doing some sciencey stuff, and I've been talking about meat a little bit lately because it's been in my head. And so just to put things in context, I have a little farm down in southern Tasmania. I used to be a vegetarian years ago, and I wrote this book on eating meat, and I've been very conflicted about my meat eating because an animal dies when I choose to eat meat. And when on our farm we kill animals for us to put them on the table. And so I started to wonder about the impacts of what I eat and what those impacts were. And I don't really have a science degree, but I do have a Bachelor of Applied Science, which I don't know if that counts in the real world. Mine was in biology, and so the only thing I really learnt from my degree was how to read really complex scientific papers and try to put them into sort of simpler terms. So what I'd like to do tonight is really briefly talk about one thing that I was thinking about with the ethics of eating meat, and that seems to have hit the press a lot recently. So on our farm we have pigs, we have cattle, we have goats. And we have a vegetable garden, and I was eating a lot. I eat a lot of things from our farm. Pretty much everything we eat is from our farm. And I suddenly realised one day that we were killing more animals to grow vegetables than we were to eat meat, because we were killing. We run our garden organically, but we were still using dipel and a few other things that and slug and snail pellets that kill other animals. And I started to, and the other thing that's happening, and it's happening probably tonight as I speak, is that rats and mice are eating the pea seeds and other seeds that we plant. So we kill more animals to grow vegetables than we do to rear the animals for the meat. And at the same time as I was thinking about this idea of death and how many animals die for us to eat, I was wondering if you could extrapolate that more widely, and I might talk about that a little bit later, but really what I want to talk about, I guess, is the thing that's really been hitting the news lately, which is beef or red meat, and that red meat is killing the world. Some people might have heard the figures: 15,800 litres, usually people round it up, 16,000 litres of water to get a kilo of beef. That's how much water it takes to get a kilo of beef. And, that methane, which is what cows burp out, is a greenhouse gas that's 65 times or 64 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So when a cow eats and it burps out and farts out a little bit, but mostly it's burps. This methane is a really, really potent greenhouse gas, and that in essence, by having cows, rearing cattle for the table or for dairy, that we're killing the world. And I saw the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change report last week that came out, and a lot of the press was around how we have to cut out meat eating. And it was really quite interesting to read all of this stuff, because one of the things, I'm very conflicted about my own meat eating because I know an animal has to die, and actually I know the animal that dies, unlike most people, I guess, who don't rear their own livestock. But I felt conflicted because I was looking at the cows outside my window one day and I was wondering, are they really killing the world? Like, is beef in and of itself evil? Is it a bad food to eat? Am I being unethical by eating that in the modern day society? And I was watching my cow, it's eating grass, right? Grass. I'm sorry for really sciencey people. Like, my dad was a chemist. I come from a long line of scientists. My grandfather wasn't a chemist. He was a miner. My great-grandfather was a miner. My great-great-grandfather was a miner. Coal miners in South Wales mostly. So I'm sorry if this is a bit basic, but I find it really helpful to go back to basics. So grass, like all plants, makes its own food, essentially. Grass photosynthesizes, takes the sun's energy and turns that, carbohydrate and water, carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates. So plants have this miracle ability to turn sunlight or energy from the sun into sugar, carbohydrate. That's an amazing thing, because you and I can't do that, right? The only way we can live like all other animals on Earth, the only way any animal can live on Earth is if it eats something that has already lived. We have to eat something that has lived, whether that's plant or animal. It doesn't matter. I'm not here to convert anyone, by the way, to meat eating. I seem to be an apologist for meat eating, but I'd rather not be. What I want to do is I want to put some really simple ideas into people's heads and let them make up their own mind about their meat eating. Grass captures the sun's energy, okay, and makes carbohydrate, makes sugars from carbon dioxide and water. It's beautiful. It's this beautiful thing. Now, grass, like pretty much all plants on Earth, swap those sugars with all the microbes and things, the billions of bacteria and fungi and nematodes and other things that live under the soil. It swaps the sugars that it can create through this miracle of photosynthesis. It gives the sugars to those things under the soil that are also living beings that need those sugars but can't create them from sunlight, from the energy of sun, and swaps those sugars for things it wants, so minerals and micronutrients from the soil. Now, grass, by definition, is a renewable resource. Because you can grow grass, you can grow more grass, you can grow more grass. It's all energy from the sun. It's not an unrenewable resource. So it's renewable in the same way timber is a renewable resource. Okay, you can keep creating grass from now till the sun blows up, right? So if my cow eats grass and then turns that grass in the space of 24, 36 hours into something I can eat, like milk, or it becomes part of its body, becomes meat and muscle tissue and meat, what is not renewable about that? What is the thing that makes that not renewable? So what I was interested in is carbon, and carbon is an atom, and methane's a molecule. Carbon dioxide is a molecule. So all carbon in the world can be in a cycle. Now, until we started pulling things out of the ground about 250 years ago, so let's say the start of the Industrial Revolution, that's usually the best place to start. Carbon was in a cycle. So carbon can exist in grass, trees, plants. It can exist in soil, in the microbes in the soil, or in other vegetative matter in the soil. Carbon can exist as carbon dioxide in the air, or other gases in the air, like methane. Carbon can exist in the oceans, and we've been very lucky so far that a lot of the carbon dioxide that we've been pouring, extra carbon we're pouring into the atmosphere is being absorbed by the oceans. And carbon is stored in us as animals. When you take that carbon molecule that's in the grass and put it into a cow, and the cow then burps it out, it can it's in a cycle. There's a cycle of carbon. Now, that cycle of carbon doesn't change. It can only exist in the air, the water, plants, seaweed, animals, in the ground. It can't, in microorganisms under the ground. It's not adding carbon to the system. So when people say that that beef is bad for the world, they're sort of suggesting that they're somehow adding to the carbon in the cycle. Now, the thing that cows do is they do create methane. Now, methane, as I was saying, depends on how you measure it, but it can be 64, 85, however many times you want to say, more powerful than carbon dioxide. But that's dependent on when you measure it, because methane only exists in the environment for 10 or 12 years. Okay, it has a very, very short cycle. So carbon dioxide can exist in the environment for thousands of years. So my cow eating a renewable resource, taking the carbon that already existed in the air, that has suddenly become carbon, which is carbohydrate in the grass, has stored that carbon as meat in its body and breathed out some of that carbon as methane. It hasn't added anything to the cycle. That's not the only cow in the world. There's a whole bunch of other cows in the world that are fed grain. And that is where you get these other stories. So I did the maths on our cows. 16,000 litres of water. I was at a thing recently where there's a woman saying 16,000 litres of water for a kilo of beef, that's, 60 showers or whatever, and how much water is actually used. Those numbers don't actually relate to where we are in the world. What we have to consider where we are in the world is what the animals exist on in terms of how much water it takes for them to grow. So where I live, I like to put things in context about where I live because it's Tasmania and it's the thing I know the best. It doesn't take 16,000 litres of water to get a kilo of beef if that's right. Well, it might, but that's rainfall, right? So the rain's going to fall anyway. So I'm not taking water out of my shower to create a kilo of beef. I'm not taking water from someone who wants to irrigate their cotton or their rice or, their oranges or whatever to get my kilo of beef. It's rain that's going to fall on my paddocks anyway, and it's going to grow grass, which is a renewable resource. We worked out, the numbers exist. It takes somewhere about 500 litres of water to get a kilo of beef in Australia. So it's not 16,000 litres. It takes about 4 litres of water to get one almond. If you look at the Californian experience. So when you look at water use, you can't say beef is in and of itself evil. When you look at carbon and that cycle, there is a really bad thing we can do with beef. There's a really bad way to rear cows in Australia, in the world. And most of these figures come from overseas. And that's because the carbon in the system, which until about 250, 300 years ago was pretty much fixed, we've managed to change that. And what we do now is we dig up carbon that was stored 300 million years ago. Scientists might correct me, it might be 200 million, I don't know. A long time ago in the Carboniferous period, right? So there's a whole bunch of carbon that is stored, locked away underground that we are now releasing into the system. So I can feed my cow grass, renewable resource. The grass can be fed rain, renewable resource, was going to fall on my property anyway, wasn't destined for someone else or something else. And my cow will turn that into meat or milk. I think that's a pretty ethical thing that I could eat. But the other way you can rear a cow, which is what they do more in America, we do it a bit here, is take a fossil fuel, diesel, plough a field, take the tractor, burn diesel, sow a crop, a grain crop, take the tractor, spray it with pesticide, spray it with herbicide, spray it with fertiliser, diesel. The fertiliser, fossil fuel-based fertiliser, artificial fertiliser, is 2 to 3% of the world's carbon emissions, okay? I then take more carbon out of the ground, long stored away for 300 million years as oil, coal or natural gas. I take that carbon that's stored underground and burn a bit more of it to harvest it. I burn a bit more of it to truck it to where it's got to be processed. I burn a bit more of it when it's processed, coal, oil, natural gas, one of those three. And then I burn a bit more diesel, a bit more carbon out of the long locked away carbon to truck that grain to an animal that has been put in a feedlot. So grain-fed cattle. Now, grain-fed cattle are not sustainable. Grain-fed cattle do add to the carbon in the system. Cattle who are fed grain Cows aren't designed to eat grain, actually. They're designed to eat grass. But you can get them bigger quicker, and we can use marginal country in Australia by feeding them grain. Now, the reason why I talk about this is because beef is getting a really bad rap. And somehow there doesn't seem to be a distinction between where the cow has come from and what it's been fed. It's just like beef is the problem. And the animal, I've done a lot of research into mostly the animals we eat, the most pigs, chickens and cattle. The animal is never the problem. The human is the problem, okay? Pigs and chickens, we've kept around us, pigs for 10, 15,000 years, chickens for less, just a few thousand years. Pigs and chickens, we kept them around. As human beings, we kept them around. We kept lots of animals around. We kept dogs around for about 20,000 years, and most cultures don't eat dogs. So we kept dogs around because we like being around them and because they helped in the hunt, probably. But pigs and chickens we kept around and are in the diet of most people around the world because they're recyclers. They're the ultimate recyclers. So pigs and chickens can eat things we can't, don't, and won't eat and turn it into food we can eat. Cows take something we can't eat, which is grass, made of cellulose. You and I, well, we can eat it, we can't digest it, and they turn that into meat and milk. So when I look at the ethical dilemmas around what to eat and the impacts on the world, it's never the animal that's the problem. It's how we've fed the animal. It's how we've reared the animal. A lot of my thinking has been about the welfare of the animals, but I'm not here to talk about that tonight. What I'm interested in is the environmental impacts from eating those animals. And the difference is not, beef isn't the problem, because beef, by definition, eating grass, renewable resource, killed close to where it was reared and consumed close to where it was killed, adds virtually nothing to the amount of carbon in the cycle. When I talk about beef in this context, that grass-fed beef consumed close to home, a lot of people say, well, yeah, but we could still, on that same land, you could grow vegetables. And I think this is the other thing that you need to consider when you consider what you eat, is understanding that farmland is not all the same. So that what is suitable land for avocados and macadamias and lemons and apples isn't necessarily the most suitable land to graze animals, and vice versa. So on our farm, we have these really steep parts that don't grow much, have never grown much, but you can graze cattle there, okay? Because the only thing that really does grow is grass. In the 1967 bushfires that swept through the Huon Valley, okay, killed a lot of people, it wiped out a lot of apple trees, but it also killed 72,000 or so grazing animals. Now, this was an area at the time, every single square inch of every bit of property was planted either to small fruit like gooseberries, strawberries, raspberries, or to apples. Everything that they could grow on every scrap of available land was dedicated to those fruits and fruits, essentially, and some bits to vegetables. And still on that farmland, they had 72,000 grazing animals. And the reason they did it is because grazing animals, things that eat a renewable resource that aren't adding anything to carbon in the cycle, are a valid use in some farming systems some of the time. So when I talk about ethical eating, it's not the animal that you're eating that you have to consider, it's the human behind the animal that you're eating and what their impact is. Don't assume that just because people grow fruit and vegetables that they're somehow better than people who rear animals. They're just farmers. Some are saints, some are not. What matters most is the farming system that the things have come from, whether it's plant or animal-based. Thank you.
Matthew Evans, ladies and gentlemen. Before you leave, mate, before you run away, I should have mentioned before, you are just running completely to time. In fact, we've got a couple of minutes for questions and answers.
Sure.
If we have time this evening, one thing I should have mentioned before is there's time for Q&A at the end. So, carboniferous grain-fed beef. Have we got any takers for that out here? I'll just try to get to you as quickly as I can, and we'll get some questions to Matthew before he has to wrap up. Because we've got such a line-up tonight, we've got to kind of be fairly slavish about the time, and I guess that's my role to be a ringmaster. Hello.
Hello, Matthew. That was a great talk. With the invention of cattle eating seaweed, is that mostly effective with grain-fed cows?
Yeah, so you can feed cattle a form of seaweed that is native to Queensland, and they're developing up there and trying to commercialise. So you can feed them seaweed and they produce less methane. Short answer is it's very hard to feed that in a set quantity to animals that are walking around eating grass. So it's much easier to feed it to grain-fed cattle.
We have another question over here.
Yes, thank you. You made the distinction between fat farm-fed cattle and industrial cattle, very, very plain. Do you have any idea about the percentage of industrial cattle versus friendlier-fed cattle that's actually on the market, either in the world or in Australia today? Because maybe the attack on beef is reflecting what most people buy.
Yeah, so most of the attack on beef is because of the American system, where cattle are on grain their entire life, or a lot of them are on their entire life. They have dairies that have fed cattle grain their entire life, so the cattle are never walking on grass. In Australia, I forget the numbers, but it's something around the order of 40 to 60% of supermarket meat has been through a feedlot, so it's been fed grain at the end of its life. So it's a reasonable proportion of it, but not huge. And virtually no Tassie stuff has been through a grain feeding operation.
Look, I'm going to take one more question just because it's such an interesting topic.
Oh, thank you. Look, I'm a little bit concerned about your idea of producing beef in the way you're doing it. So I guess I'd pose it in two different ways. One of them is, if every beef producer produced beef in the responsible way that you're doing it, with minimal inputs, how much beef would there be to go around? I'm guessing not very much. And the other one is, how much land would it require to produce that beef? I'm guessing a lot.
Yeah, two questions. You may not be able to produce as much because what they do at the moment is grow grain in other areas to feed the cattle. But I think meat is an extravagance. But taking animals out of a farming system, a proper farming system should be an ecological system. Removing animals from that system is arbitrary and meaningless, and it doesn't create a very good system. So if you don't have... And how much land would it take? As I was saying before, on our property, our cattle graze most of the time on areas that wouldn't be suitable for anything else, so no land. Because what's suitable for cattle and sheep isn't what's suitable for avocados and soybeans and chickpeas and lentils and other things. Yeah, exactly, biodiversity. So you always need animals in an ecosystem. So when my friend grows peas and he shoots 1,500 animals a year, that's because there's no apex predator. So if you take out the apex predator and you create something really delicious and nutritious, other things want to eat it. So I know farmers who shoot cockatoos so you can eat pistachios. I know orchardists who shoot possums so you can eat apples. Most farming systems have a way of managing animals. I know an organic strawberry grower and the hunter who shoots the ducks that eat his strawberries. So there's always something trying to eat what you grow, and so having animals in a farming system, an ecological farming system, is logical and sensible.
Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Evans, a big hand. I think Matthew's going home for dinner now, so thank you very much. So if you want to grab him on the way out, he's there. And I do recommend checking out his book on eating meat. Now,